everyone. Welcome to Reading Crossbow. My name is Lena. This is my buddy Rob, and this month we read Some Desperate Glory. And we're going to break this down and go into full book review for you. And as usual, we typically start out spoiler free, but we're going to change up the format this month. And Rob's going to do this a bit more interview style and start us off with a 10,000 foot summary.
This book is set after the fall of Earth, and most of humanity just lives as refugees on new worlds. But a holdout group of humans plots its revenge against this alien menace that destroyed Earth. The main character, Valkyr, or Kyr for short, is challenged to understand why Earth fell and help understand the paramilitary faction she's been raised in.
So you probably saw my halfway review. I really liked this book for the first bit that I read. I felt it was good to stop the book before it got to the wisdom. I knew it was heading somewhere that probably was going to be super spoiler, and I rated this book a 4 out of 5.
Yeah, that's a pretty high rating right out of the bat. I would actually, yeah.
I don't usually do that.
Yeah, no, I would say this is my favorite book we've read on the show.
I would say it's not my favorite book we've read on the show. After reading past that first part, my rating went down. But yeah, up until the halfway point, I had given it a 4 out of 5.
All right, that's some strong words. Well, let's find out why that is.
Let's do it.
To be clear, a lot of books tend to have two kind of stories that go along, and at the very end they kind of come together at the conclusion of the story. It's a common storytelling trope. Now for this book, this is following a different one, which is it's one story for about half the book, and then there's a radical change, and then it's a different story after that. And so we're going to try to not spoil what's happening, but as Lena discussed, we're probably going to at least hint at some of that information because it's important to help understand what the book and see if it's something you might be interested in reading.
Yeah, definitely. The book is something that we've seen a lot on our show so far is because not all the books I've read do this have parts to them, and this book was clearly, like very clearly for me, really defined by these parts, whereas some books are less defined by their parts and more just like it's like a nice stopping point. It kind of picks up and flip, but these are like very distinct. So it should call out from the beginning. Parts 1 through 3 are all about the development sort of the main character and her and really giving sort of backstory, where she's from, what she's doing, talk about this society that she lives in on Gaia Station and how unique it is, how it's different and how it's challenging. And then parts, I guess, 3 through 5 are more what you just talked about, which is like, whoa, this starts to change. The story gets sort of crazy. And then the last part after that is sort of how it wraps up in the conclusion. And it takes you on a wild ride.
It is a wild ride. And I think that's part of the fun of a story like this. And I mean, it's supposed to be a space opera. That's kind of what you get as part of that kind of story.
I talked a little bit in my halfway episode, and this is a question I wanted to ask you before you got to the questions for me, about this book, at least for me, for what I had read on the halfway, being very similar in writing style to The Expanse. I do think that changed for me once I got, from the wisdom part on. But how did you feel? Did you have those same, like, this is a lot like The Expanse similarities?
Yeah, I mean, This book series does have faster than light space travel, which is not really something you get within The Expanse. But what I found that reminded me of The Expanse is how realistically awful humans are.
Sadly, yes.
and that's something that really I really liked about The Expanse series. I really liked in Expanse, like Holden's just optimism and, do the right thing. But, all the corporations and the terrorist groups and that kind of stuff within the Expanse series, they're doing things that make sense within that world, even though they're just stupid. When you take a step back, you're like, why would you do that? But I guess it makes sense that they're trying to make money or they're trying to advance a cause. And this book kind of has that kind of a feeling. It has that grim, gritty realism that I liked from The Expanse.
So I loved The Expanse too. I haven't made it through the whole series, but I think the reason why I felt like this was so similar is because the main character, Kier, short for Valkyr in this book, was a lot like Bobby Draper in The Expanse. Now, not in physical similarities, because Bobby Draper in The Expanse is, supposed to be more like dark skin, dark hair, and this character, as you can see from the cover, light skin, light hair. But they both have that same attitude, like no bullshit. They don't fuck around. They're huge. Even the dudes are intimidated by them, and they're just like not. Yeah, I guess I almost want to say brainwashed, kind of like into how they're feeling and drilled into being this type of person. And they both change throughout, and so for me the characters were too similar, but that's probably why I felt that way.
So other than The Expanse, is there any other books or movies that this kind of reminded you of? Because I have a few in my head. Expanse is for what came up first for you. Is there anything else that kind of gives you the feelings of this book?
Well, it follows like this type of thing that a lot of these types of books do, where they put people into factions. So I get a little bit of like Allegiant, Divergent, a little bit, but mostly I said this my halfway to The Giver. I thought it was interesting that it seemed like one person was really controlling the information or propaganda, so to speak, which was Joel in this series. But in The Giver, it was the Giver was holding the information, and they were like giving medication to dumb people down, which is very, very, very different. But I find that this happens a lot in these kind of sci-fi utopian series where they want to faction off the people. So yeah, very similar in this too, where they send them off into different sections for them to specialize in what they do. So common. At this point, I'm used to it.
Okay, for me, what I found the similarities that I was most picked up on was things like The Postman and the kind of post-apocalyptic, paramilitary feel of, like, instead of in The Postman where you take where the book follows the actual postman as he's wandering around the normal people, and the Holmness, which are the kind of survivalist paramilitary out there. They're the enemy. In the case of this book, you're centered inside the Holmness camp and seeing the world from someone who's grown up and this is the only thing they knew. So it reminded me of that. It reminded me a bit of like Starship Troopers in the book. Mostly in the books where like there's a lot of kind of at least discussion of like the philosophical reasons for why they do things. Not as much of that, but and then the obvious one that stands out for me is The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
So there's because this is post-apocalyptic, they're trying to control reproduction, and so there's definitely a feeling of like Handmaid's Tale in space.
That's fantastic. Okay, you know what's funny is I'm caught up to watching that series, but I haven't read the books, and I could not stop watching the series. Definitely something I binged. Actually, didn't love the actress for the main character in that one, but this world, they're so scary. I wore the right shirt for this. Holy crap. As like a woman reading stuff like this, it's like, damn, like this is the worst. And it's also like part of you kind of gets it. Like, if we had hardly any humans left, that you have to make them, that there's but like, gosh, that's awful. It's horrible. I don't even want to think about it. Yeah. Handmaid's Tale is depressing and sad and horrendous. And so is this.
So another thing I was curious about is the main character is kind of, especially at the start of this book, because she's deep into this, militaristic faction who's kind of, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they are the terrorists. they think they're the freedom fighters, but it's arguable that they're just the terrorists, and the main character is centered in this society. And so how do you feel about like having following a main character that was essentially has unpleasant thoughts and actions?
Well, I read a couple of reviews too ahead of this, and it's common that most people don't like the main character when they read this. She's she's too nailed into this. She like but you get it like the more you read on, like I just feel really bad for her. Like the thing that we should probably point out is this propaganda that she's being fed is fed to her from basically like her uncle. It's not her real biological uncle, but like for all intents and purpose, like she was raised, this person's like a father figure to her. So we have to take that into account, that she's been brainwashed this information from someone that she should really trust.
Yeah, and a big part of this story of this is, can she essentially see the world in a new way and break free from this indoctrination?
And she
And
does.
it's not an easy process, but I found that to actually be fairly realistic in its portrayal, because even as the book gets on, like she still holds on to certain ideas that are uncomfortable. um and even when she thinks she's like, oh, I'm changing my opinion, and she still has some kind of not great impressions. But that's the growth of this character. She's growing a from a character that's fully indoctrinated. She is a war machine from beginning, and she's essentially learning to become a human being.
She is. Yeah, I wanted to say something about that too. Like the thing is, her she learns humanity. She learns how to care, and the interesting thing about that is she learns humanity towards an alien, or she learns it because of being carried to someone who's not human. And this is because I think partially her humanity or her world was so small. And it really kind of drives home that travel, see the world thing that you hear, like see other people, because she didn't know that that's all she knew. By the end of the book, we learn that there's like 2,000 people on Gaia Station. And when she sees more of the world and realizes how many humans are out there, which is something that she didn't know, and how she was raised, and we're going into a little bit like we haven't really talked about how she sees the rest of the world, but and that's when she starts to see, once she gets out of her little cocoon, that the world is very different than she was raised to see. But she doesn't learn the humanity as much from those encounters as she does from the tiny little alien that she interacts with.
Yeah. So when we discussed the Poppy War, one of the things we talked about at the beginning of the review was what was the author trying to explore? And that, in the case of the Poppy War, she was exploring how a person becomes evil or does evil things. What did you get out of this book? What do you think the author was trying to explore, and did they succeed in that idea?
Well, two things. First of all, like learning humanity, like I said, that was one of the big ones that stood out. And then the second one was that stood out really strongly for me was when you try to weighing bad against bad, which bad is worse than other bad? And this is a common study of war, and something that she mentions actually in the back of her book. So I'll bring that up now. So I liked that the author took the time to really research war, and she takes the time to credit a few authors and books. The Anatomy of Fascism by Robert Paxton, The Impossible State by Victor Cha, discussing the history, the logic, and international position of North Korea. So there we go. Going Clear by Lawrence Wright, which talks about creation and Scientology, and The Spartans by Cartilage, Paul Cartilage, an overview of militarized ethno-states. So really, she clearly did her homework. And she talks often in this book about, well, this one decision might be right, could be wrong, but it saves this many people. And which bad is worse bad, which bad is good bad, and really all things are bad. Which level of bad is the worst bad?
And I think that's explored throughout the entire book. Even like the ending is not a crisp, clean type of ending. It's a very muddy. This is the best outcome, but it's not a clean happy ending, nor an awful depressing ending. It is just kind of a messy ending because it's trying to give that realistic feel for how this could have gone down.
And that's partly through exploring these utopian societies. And we're talking about, she referenced Scientology in here. Don't want to go crazy religious, guys. Don't attack us in the comments or anything. And then it's also brought up a few times about the leader of Gaia Station. And it sort of questions a little bit, doesn't directly spelled out about him maybe fathering a lot of the war breeds in the book, because by the end of it she starts to notice a lot of the children look the same when she gets all the children together, and that's when she has this aha moment of like, wow, they must all have a similar father, which kind of gives you this kind of Hitler-esque sort of everybody should be the same, get sameness in here, we're going to breed out what we don't want, and this like forced utopian society was also, a common theme of the book, and of course in her reference material.
Yeah, and essentially it's an authoritarian survivalist type organization. In the Postman, the author of the Postman, he actually said the whole point of that book was a critique of the survival of the people who kind of plan for the end of the world. The collapse of society, and how so, and I feel like this book has a lot of that same kind of vibe, that the people who are like happy that the earth got destroyed, yeah, those are probably awful people because they're just seeing this as a power grab, and that was I don't know. I thought that was a very interesting and realistic take on the way things do play out in the real world.
This just takes me back to also like ninth grade English with like Orwell stuff, like absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? Like these I mentioned it in my halfway episode that these the four dreadnoughts that come to basically create Gaia Station, were corrupted by this leader who just really pursued power, and too much so, and really did so in such a way that just created a more corrupt world than they were even in before. So just,
Okay.
yucky stuff.
Yeah. So I guess when we were introducing the book, we talked about some of the kind of quotes about what people had said about the book, and it was kind of advertised about that this book was going to give you some feelings, specifically ugly crying. Did this book evoke any emotions for you?
I'm glad you brought that up, because no, I did not. I was very sad about that because I wanted to feel. I want to feel. And the quote says, a profoundly humane and brilliantly constructed space opera, true, that will have you cheering, swearing, laughing, and ugly crying. It's perfect. I did none of those things. I did not cheer, swear, laugh, or ugly cry, and I am a little sad about that, Rob.
I don't know. So I'm a tough sell for things like crying at books or movies and stuff, because I don't do it at the obvious spots when people are like, oh, this is the sad scene, or this is when the character died. I get all weepy when like the third act in a Spider-Man movie, when he's up against all odds and he has to like keep going, or in Megamind when the Welcome to the Jungle starts playing and he starts to become a hero. I think it all comes down to Rocky. So in the Rocky movies, when I think Mick is yelling at him, "Stay down," and he's like, "No, I got to get back up," and he gets back up. It's the getting back up. That's the moment I really like, when the person is really just stepping up to be the big damn hero. And this book had that moment for me.
I think that's easy to do when the heroine is likable. And this author spent a good third of the book making the heroine not likable. So for me that was tough. I'm curious what that moment was for you, because I certainly didn't find it.
Essentially, without essentially doing any spoilers, it's basically when she's on the intercom and she's basically yells out, or says, "I'm coming for you."
Oh yeah, okay.
And essentially knowing, that this is a very dangerous action she's about to do.
If
And
it were a
I don't know.
movie, if it were a movie, maybe with like the theme song, I get you. I know where you're going, right? And that's when
Yeah.
the music picks up, and that's when she looks around, grabs whatever weapon she goes. Yeah, sure, but it wasn't written that way for me. But it's okay. I feel you. That was a good scene. It was good.
Yeah. So which character would you say you liked the most then?
The alien Yiso, for sure, because this alien has information that's part of like this wisdom that we haven't really talked about much yet, which is it's basically like this being that's created. It's not a being, it's not really alive, but it's like artificial intelligence that was trained over so many years that it eventually becomes just so very, very intelligent. And so these alien beings, the Mayota, they are part of this almost like sentient with the wisdom. I don't know how to describe it. You have to read it to know. But basically this alien's really young. This alien's like younger than our lead character, who's about 17. And at one point she asks him his age and he says 12, and he's like, oh wait, no, I got that wrong. And he didn't do the calculations right between their years and her years, but it still only came out to like 15 when he was done. He's super young for a being that can live like 10,000 years. But because he's connected to this almost sort of central nervous system in a way of their race, he knows more, right? So he has this vast knowledge. And with his vast knowledge of pretty much everything, at one point singles out this person of all the people in the world, despite the fact that they killed 14 billion of them, of all the remaining people in the world, this one's special. Why is this one special? And kind of zoned in on her. And also like just humor in general. This character's funny in a way that's not like sarcastic or overly witty. It's just that they're so young. And so like there's just some funny moments that they don't quite understand, they don't pick up on, because they're essentially like a little toddler baby. And I find Yiso's encounters to be very interesting. And the thing is that they know of humans and they know how humans are. There's an excerpt at the beginning of the book, and actually in front of several chapters from alien perspective. And now those are the things that he knows. So when when Kier does very human-like humanity sort of things, where she takes care of him, mends him when he's broken. This is a moment where he's really learning that maybe what he knew, so she has very little knowledge, right? She's in this tight space being fed propaganda, and he has a massive amount of knowledge. And even with that, he finds out that what he knows to be true might not also be true. So very interesting.
Yeah. I think for me, the character that I liked the most was essentially, because there's some timey-wimey, stuff that happens, but essentially Kier gets a glimpse at what could have been. And we're going to call that Val. So there's Val and Kier, and so she has this kind of understanding of a different way the world could have gone. And what I really liked about that interaction, and I actually really wish there'd been more of it. I think it was actually underplayed. But I really loved that these two versions of a same person were able to communicate with each other and be like, what the hell? Like, this looks awful for you. And the other one was, kind of thinking about the Val's life is, wow, you guys are soft. Like, you are so weak.
And
just
we should point out, not in a Spider-Man you way when they're existing at the same time, but in their minds.
Yeah.
Because she has the knowledge that a previous her existed somewhere in a previous, and now her exists, and they both their memories are alive in her mind, which is so cool and super badass. Because I hate timey-wimey stuff in books, but I liked that.
Yeah, and I actually wish they had done a little bit more. It really kind of reminded me of in Farscape when he was interacting with this thing he called Harvey, which was basically an AI that was in his head, and he's having conversations with Harvey, and he's constantly, the main character is interacting with this thing in his head that no one else could see. I actually kind of wish there was more of that in this story, where the two versions of this person um, interacted a lot more, and I think it was actually truncated for brevity. Um, and I really wish they just turned it up a little bit more, because I really liked that interaction and that kind of amalgamated character.
And that's what I was talking about. That's that section after I stop my halfway. So basically, where it begins with the wisdom. So 3 to 5, parts 3 to part 5, is this timey-wimey stuff where we get kind of different timelines, different. And we're not going to spoiler it too much, but you get to see kind of different outcomes. And that also leads into what I said earlier, where which bad is the worst bad. And this is kind of this like this progression the story takes you through. But I'm curious, did you like Val or Kier more?
I would have to say, as a character, I liked Kier more, because she showed agency, she showed growth. We didn't really get a chance to see solo Val enough for me to say I liked her more or less.
Interesting though, like cool story. I also like what the author did with the play on their names, because
Mm-hmm.
we have Valkyr, and then in one world we have Val, and one world we have Kier, as you said, and then we have another character. I think it's Lizabelle, but I guess it might be pronounced Lisa Bell. I read it as Lizabelle when I was first reading it, but later on their character's Lisa. So just the first part of their name. So this author did that. I thought it was very clever.
Did you find the characters in this book kind of realistic and believable, or were they more like caricatures or sock puppets, fairly unbelievable in
I
the way they work?
I'd say very believable. A lot of character depth here. I think we talk about me playing movies in my head. I got the mental image wrong, and I realized that towards the end of the book, when they start talking about this similar race, when she's gathered up a bunch of the children, they're collecting people on the space station. Don't want to go too much into that, and she sees all the children around her and realizes, wow, they all look the same, or ooh, that one's obviously your brother to somebody else. And I realized at that moment that they all look, or they should all look like one or two people there, a few people there. And that's when I realized I'd pictured them wrong the whole time. So I felt like a little bit bamboozled in the end, because I was like, oh, wait a minute. And I don't know why I didn't notice the front cover that they're blonde. But when I was, maybe it's because my connection with the Expanse and Bobby Draper, like I mentioned, where they're all kind of more Polynesian looking, and these were, very very Nordic looking. So I did not picture that at all. But yeah, character depth was fantastic. Really great job. We knew Magnus was sensitive. We knew he had a whole nother side of him, very soulful, maybe even old world kind of. We knew Avicella has this. I wouldn't say that they're evil. Their brain works super fast and super intelligent, sees multiple outcomes, almost like a advanced species of their own in this human world. And we have the very caring Lizabelle, and that's incredible to go that deep into sub characters that didn't even tell their story. I felt like I knew them.
Yeah, I thought the characters were great. None of them felt like a caricature or like a stereotype. They all had their own voice. Even like her kind of rival, who was actually who was not Nordic looking. She had her own voice and her own story. And as we dealt with the timey-wimey stuff, you got to see even more of that and why each of these things happen. And I don't know, I thought the characters were great. I think that was one of the strongest points of this story.
Absolutely. I want to talk about Avicella a little bit too. Like, how cool. Like, that character for me was like super, super cool. We talked a little bit about, different kind of arcs in the worlds and different kind of parallel moments. And there's a little bit of time travel-y kind of stuff. So we get to see 3 different versions of Avicella, which is very interesting. And in each version, they are ultimately the same person, which I feel like is maybe slightly different for some of them, but this person's the same to their core, and could have been somewhat related to they are a genius. If you're a genius, what does that mean? How cool is that? So yeah, Avicella was one of my favorites, even though they were kind of bad. But also badass. Bad and badass. Yeah, cool character there. Good job, Emily Tesh.
So in some of the books that we've read, there's been a couple like drier sections or sections that I was like, that didn't need that. That could have maybe been trimmed down, or maybe here's a section that could have been expanded upon. Was there anything in this book where you're like, No, I think I needed more of this or less of this other area. As far as how the book progressed and the length of it.
Yeah, I didn't like. I said it earlier. I don't like dimensional travel stuff. I really dislike that in general. It's just not my favorite thing. I hate it when series do that. A lot of series get ruined because of that. A good example of that is Sci-Fi's Eureka. I thought it was a great show. Fantastic show for me. I mean, yeah, it was cheesy. You know the one.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And then it gets to the point where they have to like time dimension. This happens in so many shows, and I feel like that's when writers get bored. However, different example here is part of the storyline, so it was part of it. I just had to convince myself to like it. Once I did like it, I agree. I wanted to know more about Val. I wanted to know what happened between Val and Lisa. Won't tell you guys too much about that, but there's a little bit of story with Val and Lisa. I wanted to know. I also was curious, like, there's a little bit of Kier and Lisa in the end of the book. Like, are they going to go that direction? And that's where you mentioned they left some things open. But I also wish that one thing I wish they would have explored more was the backstory of her mother. Because there's a section in the book where she hears a voice recording of her mother, and we get some conflicting information where she's told her mother was something before, held a particular station, and then actually found out she was held a different station, much better stature, and had a different story. It doesn't go into it very much. And so I think maybe learning more about her mother at some point would have been more interesting. But yeah, it was. I think the author spent a decent amount of time in each section.
Yeah, I think it was cut. Generally speaking, while like I said, there's actually several parts of this story where I think I kind of wanted more or would have been excited for more. I think for pacing reasons, it was trimmed pretty well to keep the story advancing forward. There was no like big exposition dumps. There was the main story went along at a pretty good pace, not so fast that you didn't understand what was going on. It was pretty. So I think the story was in that way edited well.
I'd say one thing, though, that I'm glad they didn't do, so to take a different take on what you just asked me, there's a part of the book where they kind of get to visit different sections of themselves, as we've said. And at one point, I was cringing, hoping that Magnus wouldn't get his version of something that happened. They have different arcs. And because he experiences something that's quite dramatic. It's a very dramatic moment in the story. And in my mind, I'm thinking, oh no. Don't let him experience this. Don't let his current version have the memory of that. And you're kind of dreading this happening. That's probably a feeling moment when you talked about getting feelings. I felt dread for this character. Like, if the author lets them have this memory, because Yiso the alien has the ability to kind of let people see different outcomes of things. If Miso lets him see this, I'm gonna be mad. Like, I don't want this, and the author didn't. I thought that was great.
Yeah, no, that I mean, if it kind of give you that feeling, that's that investment that you're looking for. Yeah. It's kind of like when we read Fourth Wing, and I was like, oh, please don't follow up with this character because I don't want anything bad to happen to him. Yeah. And so that's that emotional investment that I think is something I look for in books. So here's something, this book that's unique to this book compared to all of our previous books. Not once is the title ever inside the book.
No, but the Expanse is.
Yeah.
I don't know if you caught that. I think twice they actually say the Expanse, and one of them, I want to say it ends as like the end sentence on a page, so it got caught in my brain, and I was like, it is like the Expanse. But anyway, yeah. But no, they don't. I thought they would.
Yeah, but do you think Some Desperate Glory, do you think that title, because it's, like I said, all the other ones, they're intrinsic to the story itself. This one, because the title's not intrinsic to the story, is the title fitting, or is there a better title that you could?
The title's perfect, and I thought that from like before, when I was getting to my halfway episode. This is the most perfect title, and I thought she might monologue in her head, like, why am I doing this? Why am I keep pushing for this? Why do I keep fighting for, this home that I no longer believe in? Is it because of some desperate glory I'm searching for? And I kept waiting for her to kind of come to the conclusion. And after reading Face the Night, I'm so glad that she didn't. But yes, the title is perfection. It really is.
Yeah, essentially that is a big, almost motivating factor for at least a good portion of this book. Is that's the inspiring event of this story, or not event, but it's just the inspiring thing that drives the character forward. Is they're trying to get that desperate, they're desperate for some glory. They want that because this is the culture she's been raised in. So as far as we know, this is a one-shot book. This is not a planned as a series. Do you think if a sequel were to be announced, would you be interested in reading that?
That's tough because that goes sort of into how I would rate the book in a way. But there's definitely an opening for a sequel. I'll put it that way. I didn't get enough connection to the characters. I didn't pull enough emotion from this book that I don't know if I would read a sequel. But let's say I'm interested in a character that would be in the sequel, which I did not cover in my halfway, so I'm nervous to do now. But there is a character that's very important to our main character, and the book definitely sets it up in a way that story could be continued.
Okay.
I don't know. That's tough. No, probably no.
Yeah. So for me, I'm not sure. I feel like this book should have a sequel. I think it tells its story well. It has a kind of conclusive ending.
It does.
I don't think it needs a sequel to be a successful story. If there was one, I'd probably pick it up out of curiosity. I'm gonna just keep an eye out on this author because I'm very curious what they do in the future. But I don't think this story needs a sequel, and
yeah.
I don't know.
I'd pick it up. Maybe I'd put it on my shelf, but I wouldn't be dying to read it. Whereas, because Fourth Wing had so much emotion in it, for example, I read Iron Flame 2 days after it came in the mail. I already read that. I couldn't wait to read it, but I wouldn't have that emotional investment in the rest of the story because the author did do a very good bang-up job wrapping it all up all pretty and letting you wonder if you wanted to.
Yeah. So I guess we're at that time. The question is, how do you rate this book?
I don't know. I feel peer pressure now. I rated it a 4. And you don't like, or at least you make fun of me when I do 0.8s or 0.2s. This is definitely a 4 from 1 to 3. Parts 1 to 3. This was for me a 3 from parts 3 to 5. But I'll tell you why. It's because my brain doesn't like reading spacey stuff. So there's sections where she's see, laugh. There's sections where she's jumping between propulsion things with engines, and she's timing it right, and it reads like a movie where it's oh, I'm used to jumping across these things, and I can dart here and I can dart there, and I'm ugh. My eyes gloss when I read that. I don't want to know. That's the kind of thing I want to watch happen. I don't want to read happen because I feel a lot of writers, even talented ones like this writer, do a poor job trying to write it well enough that my brain makes it happen. I hate those moments, and because I skimmed them, I have to write that low. And then the end of the book's probably also a 4. So yeah, 3.5. 3.5! I did it!
So we haven't really talked about one of the things that I kind of liked about this book in general is it kind of reminds me of older sci-fi novels that are really big on concept. You're writing a story in order to tell this grand, explore a grand idea, and especially the way this book is broken down into the 6 distinct sections. That feels very much like an serialized fiction from old sci-fi and fantasy books, and so this book kind of scratches that itch a bit for me. It does feel a lot more like it if you take out some of the more modern concepts like the pronouns and that kind of stuff, and you just stuck, I wouldn't have been surprised if this story had been written 40 years ago. The way that the story, the way it's being told, and the ideas it's trying to convey. And so I really liked this story for that reason. It kind of, and because I haven't really, a lot of the big epics sci-fi I've been reading lately is nothing like this, and that's not a bad thing. It's just that this is more written in an older style that I really kind of enjoy. So, and that's not a knock on the book. In fact, it's very much so not a knock on the book. So I said earlier, I actually would put this as my favorite book that we've read on this series for 2023. There's books I read before this show that I didn't, or outside of this show that I enjoyed more. But within this show, this is my top rated book. So I'm actually going to rate it a 5.
Whoa! Okay,
that's
something.
I can't read. I mean, if you're waiting for perfection, it will never come. So this book has all the things. It has grand ideas. It has great character development. All the side characters are developed really well. It has all and there was no parts where I'm sitting there like screaming at the book, like, why would you write it that way? Or why is this section so boring? It had none of those things for me. I just solidly enjoyed this book.
Well, that's great.
So
and I want to comment on that too. Like some books, like I rated Face the Night higher than this book, even though Face the Night was written much poorer writing style, but it was way more fun. I had more fun reading this book than I did reading this book, which is why I rate it higher. But I have to say, this is a phenomenally talented author. I had to look up 2 words that I didn't know what they meant, and when I looked them up, I was surprised. I was like, that is clever and brilliant. And she's very interesting to read and just writes very, very, very well. I'd say, even though I might not be interested in reading a sequel to this, I would be very interested in reading some of her novellas. She's wrote 2 that were award-winning novellas. So
yeah, and I'm definitely gonna watch for her future books to see what she does next.
Very talented.
Very good book.
So yeah, reviewing books is weird. We should just say that. Like it's weird. I didn't get as much feeling from this, which is why it's lower. But it's my second favorite book, I think, even though 1 was rated higher. I think my favorite one we've read was Fourth Wing. Second would be Some Desperate Glory. Third would be Face the Night. And, well, Poppy Wars. Just sorry, Rob.
I think my order is a little bit different, but pretty similar. All right, so if you're new here, we do this every month. We each pick a book. We challenge each other to read these books in each other's kind of preferred styles, and come back next week to find out what we're going to read for our next month.
And don't forget to join our community where we discuss all these books and other books we've read. So join us in Discord and click that link below.
Make sure you like and subscribe, or I might have to, push Lena in front of me when the abductors come.